So what happens when everything falls apart? When the people you're supposed to trust are corrupt, when your whole nation is teetering on the edge of collapse, and it feels like God is just silent? Well, sometimes the answer doesn't come from the top. Sometimes it starts with a single, desperate prayer from one woman. We're going to dive into that story right now, looking at the first 5 chapters of 1 Samuel.
Here's how we're going to break this all down. We're going to walk through it chapter by chapter, really simple. We'll start with that mother's prayer, then we'll see the corruption in the priesthood, witness a young boy getting a life-changing call from God, then brace for a devastating national defeat, and finally, we'll see what happens when God decides to fight his own battles.
All right, let's jump right in. Now, you might think a story this big would start with kings or wars or some huge political event, but no, this story starts small. It starts in the heart of one woman, Hannah, and her private pain is about to change everything for her entire country.
You really have to get this. In her culture, not being able to have children wasn't just a personal sadness. It was a public humiliation. And to make things 1,000 times worse, her husband's other wife, Peninnah, never let her forget it. She was cruel, constantly taunting her and making her life miserable. This wasn't a minor issue. It was the absolute core of Hannah's pain. So during one of their yearly trips to the temple at Shiloh, Hannah she hits a wall. She's completely broken. And in that moment of total desperation, she prays this raw, honest prayer, and she makes a vow that is just radical. She says, "God, if you give me a son, I won't just be grateful. I will give him right back to you to serve you for his entire life."
And God hears her. He does. Hannah has a son, and she names him Samuel, which basically means asked of God. And Hannah is a woman of her word. As soon as Samuel is old enough, she does exactly what she promised. She takes her long-awaited, precious son to the temple and leaves him with the priest, Eli, to serve God forever.
And the takeaway here is huge. This isn't just a nice story about an answered prayer. It shows us a few things, right? First, that prayer that comes from the deepest part of you, from real need, that kind of prayer has serious power. Second, true faith isn't just about asking for things, it's about following through on our commitments to God. And maybe most important of all, it shows that one person's act of faithfulness can have ripples that change the history of a nation.
Okay, that brings us to chapter 2. And this is where the tension really starts to build. Because inside that very same house of God where little Samuel is now living, we see 2 totally different ways of serving God, and they are on a collision course.
And this really lays it all out. On one side, you've got this little kid, Samuel, sincerely and faithfully serving God. On the other side, you've got the guys in charge, the high priest's sons, Hophni and Phinehas. The Bible doesn't pull any punches. It calls them sons of Belial, which is a nice way of saying they were worthless, wicked men. They were stealing from the offerings and just totally corrupting the whole system of worship. Well, God isn't going to just let that slide. A prophet shows up and delivers this absolutely devastating message to Eli, the high priest. He tells him, "Because you put your sons before me, because you let them get away with this, your family's time as priests is over." And it all boils down to this timeless principle: if you honor God, he will honor you. But if you treat him with contempt, you will be brought down.
So, with the old, corrupt priesthood now under judgment, God does something completely unexpected. He's about to bypass the entire broken system to find a new voice for his people, a new kind of leader for a new era.
Now you have to get the atmosphere here. This was a spiritually dark time. People were not hearing from God. The scripture says his word was precious, which means it was incredibly rare. There were no visions, no big prophetic messages. So when God finally does speak, it's a huge deal. No one was expecting it. So in the middle of the night, a voice calls out the boy's name, Samuel. He thinks it's Eli, the old priest, so he gets up and runs to him. This happens again, and then a third time. It's only then that the light bulb goes on for Eli, and he realizes, oh, God is calling the boy. So he tells Samuel what to say. And when that voice calls out a 4th time, Samuel is ready. He answers, "Speak, for your servant is listening." And that single night was a total game changer. From that point on, God was with Samuel, and his words carried the weight of divine authority. The news spread like wildfire, all the way from the north of Israel to the south. Everybody knew a true prophet of God had finally arrived. A new day was dawning. But there was still that judgment hanging over Eli's family, and in chapter 4, the other shoe drops. The story takes a sharp, tragic turn as the nation gets dragged into a military and spiritual disaster by their old enemies, the Philistines. So Israel goes out to fight the Philistines, and they get routed, losing about 4,000 men. Now, instead of stopping to pray and figure out what went wrong, they have a really bad idea. They decide to bring the Ark of the Covenant, this sacred symbol of God's presence, onto the battlefield like some kind of good luck charm. They treat God's holiness like a magic trick, and the result is an even bigger catastrophe. 30,000 soldiers are killed. The aftermath is just swift and brutal. In one horrible day, the prophecy comes true. Hophni and Phinehas are both killed in the battle. The Ark itself is captured. And when the news gets back to the 98-year-old Eli, the shock of hearing the Ark is gone is so great that he falls backward off his seat, breaks his neck, and dies. The entire religious leadership is wiped out. Just gone.
And just when you think it can't get any worse, it does. When Phinehas' wife hears the news, the shock sends her into labor. And as she's dying giving birth, she names her son Ichabod. It's a name that perfectly sums up the nation's despair. It means the glory has departed. With the priests dead and the ark gone, it felt like God had completely abandoned them.
But here's the thing. Is the glory really gone? Or has it just relocated? Chapter 5 completely flips the script. It shows us that the God of Israel doesn't need an army to protect his honor. In fact, the ark, all by itself, as a war trophy in enemy territory, is about to prove more dangerous than any army they ever faced.
So the Philistines, feeling pretty proud of themselves, they haul the ark into the temple of their main god Dagon and set it up like a trophy. You know, our God beat your God. But the next morning they walk in and find Dagon has fallen flat on its face in front of the ark. So they prop him back up. The next day he's not just down, he's completely smashed. His head and his hands are broken off. The message couldn't be any clearer.
And God's judgment isn't just on their idol. A painful plague of tumors breaks out in the city. So, terrified, they ship the ark to the next Philistine city, Gath. The same plague breaks out there, but even worse. So they try to move it to Ekron, and the people there start screaming, "You're trying to kill us all! Get that thing out of here!" The Philistines are learning a very hard lesson. You don't capture the God of Israel. You don't control him.
So after all of that, the chaos, the collapse of leadership, the catastrophic defeat, it all leaves us with this one huge question, right? When our leaders fail us, when our institutions crumble, and they will, where does the real power actually lie? And what these first few chapters of Samuel suggest, pretty powerfully, is that true authority isn't found in any human system or religious object. It's found in God himself, who is sovereign and in control, even in our moments of greatest failure and chaos.